My name is Christina Honoré. I went to UCLA. I just graduated with a major in neuroscience and a minor in African American studies. I first noticed the class when I was registering for courses for my final quarter. I needed to take two more classes to fulfill my minor requirements, and there were only a few courses that were available that would fit my schedule, and the We Gon Be Alright class was one of them. I wasn't familiar with the course before registering with it, but after reading the course description, it sounded interesting. I thought I could learn something valuable from it, and I enrolled. Uh, when I first joined the class, it seemed like my other classmates had a lot more of a background in organizing than I did, but it was still a very valuable learning experience, not just studying the history of Black organizing and labor in Los Angeles and the country, but also getting to meet with and discuss the current state of Black labor with the guest speakers that were brought in. I was particularly surprised and excited by the discussion we had with Chris Smalls, who just started the first Amazon union. But I'd have to say my favorite moment in the class was the LA city tour we took towards the end of the quarter, where we went around Los Angeles and visited some current Black worker centers, as well as visited some historical sites where prominent and influential Black businesses were started and maintained in, well, I want to say the early 20th century. It was a very informative tour. I got to learn more about the city I live in. And it was overall just a good time. I learned some interesting facts, such as the fact that this one cafe that was unfortunately closed by the time we visited was the only completely Black owned business in Watts, which was very surprising to me. And I'll have to go back there one day and try out their food because it seemed really interesting. The pictures looked nice. And one of my biggest takeaways from this course was the impact that certain crises and disasters have on Black workers. I kind of seen firsthand how the pandemic has had an effect on some of my family members who are struggling to find jobs or were struggling to find jobs, as well as some friends of mine. But the readings that we went over in this class had established how this was a recurring pattern. Whenever there's a certain crisis that affects the country, Black workers are the ones who are most affected by it. One of the readings kind of like drove that close to home by bringing up Hurricane Katrina as an example, and that's kind of what made it all click for me, because Hurricane Katrina personally affected me and my family. We were all displaced by it. We had to move to Los Angeles to be closer to family members who could support me and my younger brother, because we were still kids while my parents had to find work. And it kind of just illustrated that it wasn't just something that affected me and my family, it affected all sorts of Black workers in New Orleans and the surrounding area. The same difficulties that were brought into other courses that were brought online, but even more so since this is a very discussion heavy and collaboration based course. Since most of our meetings were online through Zoom and most of the people had their cameras off, there wasn't really much of an opportunity for us to bond with each other or get to know each other as well. Most of our communication occurred just through those discussions, which, depending on how long the lecture preceding it was either long enough for us to get to know each other or very short. A lot of us did hold discussions in the chat box, which allowed us to kind of get to know each other as well. But I'd say the biggest opportunities I had to get to know my classmates were on that LA city tour and the one in-person meeting we had earlier in the quarter, which were the only times I got to meet my classmates in person. So I'd say, yeah, just the lack of opportunity to meet each other in person definitely affected the way I was able to form a connection with my classmates. I don't want to say enlighten me, but clarify that a lot of the issues that Black workers face aren't entirely because of overt and direct racism, but mostly because of implicit biases and systemic issues that have existed for generations. And employers may not be directly discriminating against Black workers, but a lot of the decisions they make tend to affect Black workers more because of these systemic issues. Like when we were doing the final projects for my group, did the 1000 strong project, and we studied how the pandemic affected Black workers in Los Angeles, and we went into a lot of the specific issues that tackled why Black workers were being affected the most. They tended to work in the more frontline essential jobs that increased exposure. There were economic issues that left them more vulnerable. We kind of went into like each of those issues that made them more susceptible to the virus and made them more vulnerable when jobs were affected by the pandemic. And it sort of clarified a lot of this to me, because going into the class, I was expecting to be looking into a lot more of the direct discrimination that affects Black workers, which we did cover in the course, but it was refreshing and, yeah, enlightening to learn about these other issues. My understanding is that most of the people who took the course with me have some sort of background in organizing, but if anyone is interested in this course and does not necessarily have that background, I would recommend looking up um, organizations in their city, such as the LA Black Workers Center, who um, advocate for Black workers, um, educate on these issues so that they can have this sort of foundation going into the class.